Imagine a nation without a king, a people lost between forgotten victories and ancient promises. The mantle of leadership had been laid down by a man marked by courage, Gideon. His name still echoed among the hills of Israel, but he was gone, leaving behind sons, memories, and a void. Into this vacuum, one man dared to attempt the impossible, to be king, even without being chosen by God. His name? Abimelech. But what drives a son to rise against his own brothers? What causes blood to cry out from the earth, not for justice, but for unchecked ambition? That's what we're about to uncover together on this journey, laden with betrayal, manipulation, and eternal consequences. And before you judge, pause and consider. How many times do we also seek positions that God never intended for us? Abimelech was one of Gideon's many sons, but there was something different about his origins. He wasn't the product of a legitimate marriage. Rather, he was the son of a concubine from Shechem. This immediately placed him on the fringes compared to his other brothers who were from the official lineage. From an early age, he saw subtle disdain in the eyes of others, sensing a place that would never truly be his. But what was rejection to others, for Abimelech, became fuel. Inside him, an insatiable thirst grew to prove his worth, even if it meant taking the darkest path. With calculated words and a compelling speech, Abimelech went to the men of Shechem, his mother's hometown, and posed the question that would change history. What is better for you? That 70 men rule over you, or just one? It seemed like a sensible, even logical question, but it carried venom. Logic was a disguise, the desire for power, the true root. The leaders of Shechem, swayed by the idea of having one of their own as king, allowed themselves to be led astray. They gave him silver from the temple of Baal-berith, and with that money, Abimelech hired ruthless men willing to do anything, including murder. And that's exactly what he did. He murdered 69 of his own brothers, all sons of Gideon, on a single stone, a bloodbath that sealed his self-proclamation as king. But one escaped. Jotham, the youngest son, managed to flee, and his voice would echo from the heights of a mountain like an arrow shot against the blood-stained throne. Instead of weapons, Jotham used a parable. He told the story of trees that wanted a king. First, they invited the olive tree, then the fig tree, then the grapevine. All refused, for they had purposes too noble to abandon. Finally, they invited the thorn bush. The thorn bush accepted, and there was the accusation: Abimelech was the thorn bush, without fruit, without shade, without purpose, but hungry for power. This moment, my friends, carries a depth that goes beyond the story. How many times do we reject what is fruitful and choose thorny leaders because they promise easy shade? How many times do we choose the loudest instead of the wisest? Jotham's cry was like thunder in a clear sky. It wasn't just a political protest, it was a prophetic warning. He said, "If you have acted with integrity in making Abimelech king, then may you be happy together. But if not," and here he prophesied destruction, fire, ruin. He came down from the mountain and fled, knowing that messing with thorns is always risky. But what no one expected was what would come next. For a time, everything seemed to go Abimelech's way. He governed, men respected him, and his throne seemed secure. But heaven saw everything, and when God observes injustice being treated as victory, he begins to move invisible pieces. And that's how instability began to fester within Shechem, where support once came. Now doubts, suspicions, and betrayals arose. God sent a spirit of division. It wasn't something physical, it was subtle, psychological, emotional. Trust turned to ashes, and what seemed solid proved fragile. When God acts in the invisible, even iron alliances crumble like wet paper. Abimelech, realizing his throne was threatened, didn't seek repentance. He didn't look up, only forward, and with even greater violence. His hands, already stained, would plunge even deeper into blood. But hold on, we'll get there. What comes next will surprise you, because Abimelech's end is not just tragic, it's symbolic, almost poetic. An end befitting the ambition that brought him there. Abimelech, emboldened by the blood he shed, seemed invincible. But when the foundation of power is built on treachery and fear, cracks eventually appear, and the fall can be devastating. The city of Shechem, which once acclaimed their king, became the scene of suffocating tension, a silent war between what appeared to be peace and what was, in reality, a web of betrayals. The men of Shechem and the people of Thebez, who once supported Abimelech, began to distrust one another. The spirit of division sent by God manifested as a poisonous seed. Trust withered and fear grew. It was as if a shadow had fallen over that land, extinguishing the light and warmth of camaraderie. It's striking how leadership imposed by fear never sustains true peace. Abimelech knew he had to act fast. He needed to crush any resistance, as his crown was already beginning to creak in the storms he himself provoked. And that's when he made a cruel decision. He ordered the complete destruction of Thebez, a city that dared to doubt his power. On a cold night, armed men, paid by Abimelech, invaded Thebez, destroying homes and killing innocents. The violence was so immense that even the stone upon which Gideon had defeated the Midianites was used to crush the city's people. A cruel, cold, and calculated massacre meant to instill fear and control. But evil often breeds rebellion, and this barbarity ignited the wrath of the survivors. War became inevitable. Abimelech's throne was threatened from all sides, but he, blinded by power, remained steadfast on his bloody path. The Bible shows us that when justice is cast aside, the human heart itself fills with darkness. Abimelech was not just a tyrant, he was the symbol of unbridled ambition, which destroys families and nations. This story echoes in our own lives. How many times does a thirst for power or control destroy relationships and dreams? As the war progressed, Abimelech sought support even outside Shechem, but the shadow of betrayal pursued him. He knew that not everyone viewed him as legitimate, that his crown was a stain on his reputation, and so he decided to attack with everything he had. But fate had a plan for the king, who rose by the force of fear. During the siege of a tower in Thebez, where many had sought refuge, the battle seemed to be turning against him. Amidst the fighting, a woman dropped a millstone that struck his head, fracturing his skull. Imagine the scene: a king who shed the blood of his own brothers, defeated by a simple stone dropped from the top of a tower. It's almost a cruel irony of divine justice. Abimelech, realizing that death was near, preferred not to be killed by a woman and ordered one of his soldiers to kill him with a sword. Thus, he prevented the enemy from celebrating his downfall. This narrative reveals an eternal principle. Power that does not come from God is fragile and fleeting. The story of Abimelech is a warning to all of us who wish to govern our lives based on human strategies, ego, and violence. Abimelech's death didn't end the cycle of violence in Shechem. On the contrary, it opened a new, grim chapter. Without a strong leader, the city became vulnerable, divided between those who still supported Gideon's lineage and those who desired freedom from the yoke of tyranny. It's a scenario that resonates even today, showing how a leadership vacuum can create deep and lasting conflicts. After Abimelech's bloody end, a new figure emerged, an old official named Gaal, who arrived in the city bringing words of hope and revolt. Gaal rallied the people of Shechem to break free from oppression, igniting a spirit of rebellion against the remnants of Abimelech's power. It's a powerful reminder of how, even in darkness, the voice of change and resistance can arise. But what we also see here is the danger of ambition when it's not accompanied by wisdom and reverence for God. Gaal, despite speaking of liberty, lacked the vision of a leader who would guide the people toward a future of peace and justice. He was a symbol of the instability that follows tyrannical regimes. This internal struggle between tyranny and rebellion reveals the complexity of spiritual and social battles, where the true enemy isn't just a man, but pride and a lack of repentance. While Gaal gained strength, Abimelech still had loyal followers, among them Zebul, the governor of Shechem, who secretly plotted against Gaal. This game of power and espionage reminds us that, often, the battlefield lies in invisible details, in the silent strategies that define the future of nations and communities. And we cannot fail to note how biblical history, with its human and divine narratives, offers us lessons for everyday life. The divisions we see in Shechem echo in the divisions of our own hearts, where selfishness and distrust corrode communion and love. It's an invitation to examine where in our lives we need to seek unity and humility. The battle between Gaal and Zebul culminated in open warfare, with Shechem once again consumed by conflict and violence. Zebul cunningly expelled Gaal and his followers from the city, temporarily restoring order under Abimelech's lingering influence. However, the instability continued, and the cycle of vengeance had no end in sight. This chaotic scenario symbolizes the fragility of human constructions without the solid foundation of reverence for God. It serves as a warning not to let ourselves be dominated by pride and a thirst for power, as this invariably leads to destruction and pain. As we look at this story, we are invited to reflect on what we are building in our own lives. Are we building on the firm rock of faith and justice, or on the shifting sands of selfish passions and interests? With Gaal's expulsion, Shechem remained under the shadow of a fragile government, lacking true leadership that promoted justice and peace. The city lived under a constant climate of tension, like a powder keg ready to explode. This instability was not just political, but also spiritual, as the people had strayed from the path God intended, a path of faithfulness, justice, and humility. Abimelech, even in death, had left a bitter legacy, the fruit of arrogance and selfishness harvested with blood. This legacy extended far beyond his death, as the seeds of division and conflict were deeply planted in the people's hearts. It's a reality that repeats itself in many situations even today, where unhealed wounds lead to new suffering. It is precisely at this moment that a new leadership emerges, a man named Tola from the tribe of Issachar. He was raised up to be judge of Israel for 23 years, bringing a period of relative stability and renewal to the people. Tola represented a different kind of leadership, marked by humility and a commitment to justice, essential values. For rebuilding what had been destroyed, this cycle of destruction and reconstruction shows us that even when everything seems lost, God raises up leaders and creates paths to restore order and peace. It's a lesson of hope and perseverance for those facing moments of crisis in their lives. At this point in the story, we are reminded of the importance of constant spiritual renewal. Just as the people needed to turn back to God and leave behind a past of violence and pride, we too need to daily renew our commitment to faith and truth. Tola was succeeded by Jair, who governed Israel for 22 years, also bringing a time of relative peace. Jair's leadership symbolizes the importance of continuity in the pursuit of justice and balance, a call for us not to give up even when challenges persist. But as history teaches us, true transformation doesn't happen only in the political or external sphere, but in the heart of each person. The challenge is constant, choosing between the path of selfishness and war or the path of love, humility, and obedience to God. This moment in the narrative is an invitation for us to reflect on the choices we make daily and how they impact our lives and the lives around us. The story of Gideon, Abimelech, and the judges who followed is a great mirror for us. It shows that even in times of confusion, pain, and error, God does not abandon his people. He raises leaders, opens paths, offers opportunities for change and restoration. But above all, it reminds us that true power lies in the daily choice to seek justice, humility, and faithfulness. Abimelech, with his reign marked by violence and unbridled ambition, is a clear warning about the dangers of selfishness and a thirst for power. But the people, even after his death, were given a chance to start anew with leaders like Tola and Jair, who brought a time of peace and stability. This speaks to the mercy and hope that God offers whenever we open our hearts to him.